The Midnight Mailbox Wrecker, how one neighborhood exposed their HOA president's twisted scheme. I was standing in my driveway at 3 in the morning, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, watching a hooded figure sprint into the darkness with my flashlight beam chasing their shadow. My legs were burning from the chase, my lungs were screaming for air, and in my trembling hand I held a silver bracelet that had just fallen from the wrist of the person who had been terrorizing our entire neighborhood for weeks. The initials engraved on that bracelet told me everything I needed to know. K.W. Karen Whitfield, our HOA president, the woman who had been issuing violation notices to every single victim of the mysterious mailbox vandal, the woman who had been collecting fines from families who were already traumatized, the woman who had been pretending to be just as confused and concerned as the rest of us. She was the one destroying our property in the dead of night, and now I had the proof to bring her down. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me take you back to the beginning of this nightmare, because what happened on Pinewood Lane over the course of 3 terrifying weeks is something that still gets talked about in whispers at neighborhood barbecues. It is a story about power, about control, about one woman's obsession with perfection that drove her to commit crimes against the very people she was supposed to protect. And it is a story about how a group of ordinary neighbors finally came together to expose the truth and take back their community from a tyrant who had ruled with an iron fist for far too long. My name is Eli Thompson, and I have lived on Pinewood Lane in the quiet suburb of Maplewood Heights for almost 12 years now. I moved here with my wife Sarah right after we got married, drawn by the tree-lined streets, the excellent schools, and the promise of a peaceful life in a well-maintained community. For the first 8 years, that promise held true. The neighborhood was everything we had hoped for. Friendly faces, block parties in the summer, kids playing safely in the streets until the streetlights came on. It was the American dream wrapped up in a tidy package of ranch-style homes and manicured lawns. But then Karen Whitfield got elected president of the Homeowners Association, and everything started to change. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something important. If you believe that people like Karen should not be allowed to abuse their power, if you think that bullies who hide behind rules and regulations deserve to face consequences for their actions, then I need you to subscribe to this channel right now. We share stories like this every single day, real accounts of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve, and every subscription helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. Hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and join our community of people who believe in justice. Trust me, you are going to want to be here for what comes next. Now let me tell you about Karen Whitfield. She moved to Pinewood Lane about 6 years ago, into the largest house on the street, a sprawling colonial at the end of the cul-de-sac with white columns and a perfectly symmetrical facade. From day one, she made it clear that she considered herself a cut above the rest of us. Her lawn was immaculate, maintained by a professional landscaping crew that showed up 3 times a week. Her flower beds were arranged with mathematical precision, every bloom color-coordinated to match the accent shutters on her windows. Her mailbox was not just a mailbox, but a statement piece, a custom-made copper and brass monstrosity that probably cost more than my first car. Karen was in her late 50s, with blonde hair that she kept styled in a severe bob that never seemed to move even in the strongest wind. She wore pearls to check her mail. She owned an entire wardrobe of pastel cardigans that she coordinated with her seasonal wreaths. And she had this way of looking at you, this tight-lipped smile that never quite reached her eyes, that made you feel like you were being judged and found wanting before you even opened your mouth. She ran for HOA president 3 years ago, and she won because nobody else wanted the job. That should have been our first warning sign. The people who desperately want power are usually the ones who should never have it. But we were all too busy with our lives, our jobs, our families, to pay attention to what was happening in those monthly HOA meetings. We just paid our dues and trusted that someone was looking after the common areas. What we did not realize was that Karen was slowly transforming from a neighborhood busybody into a full-fledged tyrant. It started small. A notice here about a garbage can left out too long. A warning there about a basketball hoop that was half an inch too close to the sidewalk. Suggestions that became demands about the acceptable shades of exterior paint, the permitted heights of ornamental grasses, the approved styles of holiday decorations. At first, people grumbled but complied. Nobody wanted the hassle of fighting back over something as trivial as the color of their front door. But Karen was just getting started. Within a year, she had rewritten half the HOA bylaws to give herself more enforcement power. She created a violations committee that consisted of herself and two elderly neighbors who agreed with everything she said. She instituted a system of escalating fines that could reach into the thousands of dollars for repeat offenders. And she conducted what she called inspection rounds every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, walking the entire neighborhood with a clipboard and a camera, documenting every perceived infraction with the zealotry of a medieval inquisitor hunting for heresy. The Patels got fined $300 because their wind chimes were quote-unquote creating excessive noise pollution, even though they had hung those same wind chimes for 7 years without a single complaint. The Martinez family received a threatening letter because their daughter's bicycle was visible through the garage window, which apparently violated the aesthetic standards of the community. Old Mr. Henderson, who was 83 years old and had lived on this street longer than anyone, was publicly shamed at an HOA meeting for having a welcome mat that was considered too colorful. People were afraid of her, and Karen loved it. She loved the power. She loved the control. She loved watching her neighbors scramble to meet her ever-changing standards, knowing that she could make their lives miserable with a single stroke of her pen. The monthly dues kept going up to fund projects that nobody asked for, like a new sign at the entrance to the neighborhood and decorative benches that nobody ever sat on. Karen had transformed our peaceful community into her personal fiefdom, and we were all just serfs trying to stay on her good side. That was the situation when the mailbox vandalism started. The first one was the Jenkins family on the corner of Pinewood Lane and Maple Street. They woke up on a Tuesday morning to find their mailbox lying in the middle of their lawn, the wooden post snapped clean in half, the metal box dented and scratched like someone had attacked it with a hammer. There was no note, no obvious motive, nothing to indicate why someone would target this particular house. The Jenkins family was well liked, kept to themselves, never caused any trouble. It seemed completely random. We all assumed it was teenagers, maybe some kids from the high school a few miles away, bored and looking for trouble on a summer night. It happens everywhere, right? Mailbox baseball, they call it. A stupid prank that causes real damage. The Jenkins family was annoyed but not alarmed. They figured it was a one-time thing, bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. They bought a new mailbox and installed it that weekend. But then it happened again. 3 nights later, the Okonkwo's 2 houses down woke up to the same scene. Mailbox destroyed, post ripped out of the ground, metal scattered across the lawn like someone had detonated a small explosive. This time there were tire tracks in the grass near the street, but they were too faint to identify the vehicle. The Okonkwos called the police, but what could the cops really do? There were no witnesses, no suspects, no cameras that had captured anything useful. And that is when Karen made her first move. She showed up at the Okonkwo house exactly 37 minutes after Mrs. Okonkwo discovered the damage, before the police had even arrived. She was wearing her standard uniform of pressed khakis and a lavender cardigan, clipboard in hand, camera around her neck, and she was already writing. Mrs. Okonkwo told me later what happened. She said Karen walked right up to the destroyed mailbox, clicked her tongue disapprovingly, and started taking photographs from multiple angles. When Mrs. Okonkwo asked her what she was doing, Karen gave her that cold smile and said, quote, "I am so sorry this happened to you, but I have to document the violation for the HOA records. You understand? The bylaws require that all mailboxes be maintained in good condition and proper working order. You will have 48 hours to install a replacement, or I will have to issue a formal citation with associated fines." End quote. Mrs. Okonkwo was stunned. She had just been victimized by a vandal, And now the HOA president was threatening to fine her for something that was not even her fault. She tried to protest, tried to explain that she was obviously going to replace the mailbox as soon as possible, but Karen just kept nodding that patronizing nod and making notes on her clipboard. By that afternoon, an official HOA violation notice appeared in Mrs. Okonkwo's mailbox. Well, it appeared on her doorstep, since she did not have a mailbox anymore. It was printed on bright orange paper, impossible to miss, with Karen's signature at the bottom. Failure to maintain property standards. Mailbox repair required within 48 hours. Fines up to $500 may apply for non-compliance. That was when we all started paying closer attention. Over the next 4 days, 4 more houses on Pinewood Lane were hit. The Garcias, the Chens, the young couple who had just moved in 3 months ago, the Williamses, and my next-door neighbors, the Patels, who had already been through so much with Karen and her ridiculous wind chime vendetta. Each attack followed the same pattern. Sometime in the dead of night, between 2 and 4 in the morning, someone would sneak up to the house and destroy the mailbox with what seemed like overwhelming force. Posts were snapped, bolts were ripped clean out of the ground, metal boxes were dented and battered beyond recognition. And every single time, without fail, Karen Whitfield appeared at the scene within an hour of the damage being discovered, clipboard in hand, ready to issue her violations. The timing was suspicious. The pattern was suspicious. Everything about it was suspicious. But Karen played her role perfectly. She attended an emergency neighborhood meeting that she herself had called, and she stood at the front of the room with an expression of profound concern on her face. She talked about the importance of community safety. She lamented the fact that our once peaceful neighborhood was being targeted by criminals. She announced that she was personally committed to finding the culprits and bringing them to justice. And then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned that HOA dues might need to increase to cover the cost of enhanced community patrols and damage assessment. A few people spoke up, asking why the victims were being fined for something that was obviously not their fault. Karen had an answer ready. She explained, with the patience of a kindergarten teacher addressing a particularly slow child, that the HOA bylaws did not distinguish between intentional neglect and external damage. The rules existed for a reason. Property values depended on maintaining standards. If one mailbox was allowed to remain broken, the whole neighborhood would suffer. The victims would simply have to file insurance claims and replace their mailboxes as quickly as possible. Those were the rules. When someone suggested that maybe the rules should be changed to account for vandalism, Karen shut them down immediately. She said that changing bylaws was a lengthy process that required extensive review by the board, meaning herself, and that this was not the appropriate time to discuss such matters. The meeting was adjourned. People left angry but feeling helpless. What could they do? Karen controlled the HOA. She controlled the fines. She controlled everything. And the vandal was still out there, waiting to strike again. That night, I sat down with my wife Sarah and talked about what was happening. We had not been hit yet, but it felt like only a matter of time. Our mailbox was a simple black metal one on a wooden post, nothing special, but it was well maintained and had been standing in the same spot since we moved in. I did not want to come outside one morning to find it destroyed, and I definitely did not want Karen showing up with her camera and her clipboard and her barely concealed satisfaction. Sarah was the one who suggested that I upgrade our security camera system. We had one of those basic doorbell cameras that everyone has these days, the kind that connects to your phone and sends you alerts when it detects motion. But she pointed out that several of the victims had said their cameras either did not capture anything or mysteriously malfunctioned during the attacks. If there was really a vandal using some kind of jamming device, we needed something more robust. I did some research that night and found a system that could run on a hardwired connection with a battery backup, completely independent of Wi-Fi or Bluetooth signals. I also bought a separate hidden camera that I could mount in a birdhouse on our porch, something that would not be obvious to anyone casing the neighborhood. And I installed a silent alarm system connected directly to my phone that would wake me up the instant it detected motion near the mailbox after midnight. I was going to catch this vandal, whoever they were. But before I could get everything set up, the Patels were hit, and that is when everything started to unravel. The Patels had a decent camera system, better than most of the neighbors, because they had installed it after the wind chime incident as a way to protect themselves against any future harassment from Karen. Mr. Patel had made sure to get one of the higher-end models with night vision and motion-activated recording. When they woke up to find their mailbox destroyed, the first thing they did was check the footage. What they found chilled them to the bone. The camera had been recording normally until exactly 3:12 in the morning. The timestamp showed a clear image of their front yard, peaceful and undisturbed in the glow of the streetlight. Then, at 3:12 and 14 seconds, the video turned to static. Just static, like an old television that had lost its signal. The static lasted for exactly 2 minutes and 37 seconds. And when the picture came back, the mailbox was lying in the street, destroyed. Someone had deliberately jammed their camera signal. This was not random vandalism. This was not bored teenagers looking for thrills. This was planned, calculated, methodical. Whoever was doing this knew enough about technology to disable security systems. They were timing their attacks perfectly. They were covering their tracks. Mr. Patel shared his footage at the next neighborhood meeting, and the reaction was electric. Other victims checked their own cameras and found the same thing. Static at the exact moment of the attack, lasting just long enough for the vandal to do their work and escape. 3 households confirmed the pattern. Someone was using a signal jammer. Karen was at that meeting, sitting in her usual seat at the front of the room with her clipboard on her lap. When Mr. Patel finished his presentation, she clucked her tongue sympathetically and offered her thoughts. Quote, "Perhaps the vandal is more sophisticated than we realized. It might be worth investing in better security equipment. I have heard that hardwired systems are more resistant to jamming. Of course, that would be each homeowner's responsibility to purchase and install. The HOA cannot be expected to subsidize personal security measures." End quote. Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. She was too calm, too prepared with her answer, too quick to shift responsibility back onto the victims. And there was this tiny flicker of something in her eyes when she talked about the jammer, something that looked almost like satisfaction. I caught Sarah's eye across the room, and I could tell she was thinking the same thing I was. What if Karen knew about the jammer because she was the one using it? It seemed crazy, absolutely insane. Why would the HOA president be destroying mailboxes in the middle of the night? What possible motive could she have? She was the one issuing the fines, collecting the money, adding to the HOA's coffers. She was benefiting from the chaos, but that did not mean she was causing it. Did it? I spent the next few days finishing the installation of my new security system. The hidden camera in the birdhouse was completely undetectable, aimed directly at our mailbox with a perfect line of sight. The motion sensor was so sensitive that it could pick up a cat walking across the lawn. And the whole thing was running on a closed circuit that had nothing to do with Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, completely immune to any kind of jamming device. If the vandal came to my house, I was going to see exactly who they were. I also started paying closer attention to Karen. I noticed things I had never noticed before, like how she always seemed to know exactly which house had been hit before anyone officially reported it, like how she was always perfectly dressed and ready to go at 6 in the morning, as if she had been awake for hours, like how she walked with a slight limp on her left side, almost imperceptible unless you were really watching, the result of an old injury she had mentioned once at a meeting years ago. And I noticed the bracelet. Karen always wore a silver charm bracelet on her right wrist. It had been a gift from her late husband. She had told everyone at one of her self-congratulatory speeches about her decades of service to various communities. The bracelet had her initials engraved on the clasp, KW, in elegant script. She never took it off. It was as much a part of her as those pearls she wore and that severe blonde bob. I filed that detail away in my memory, without really knowing why. The 7th night came on a Friday. I had been sleeping lightly all week, my phone on my chest, waiting for the alarm to buzz. Sarah had given up asking me to come to bed normally and had started sleeping in the guest room, so my restlessness would not keep her awake. I was obsessed with catching the vandal, and I think part of me already knew who it was going to be. At 3:04 in the morning, my phone vibrated against my chest. Motion detected, mailbox area. I was out of bed before I was fully awake, grabbing the flashlight I had placed on my nightstand for exactly this moment. I did not bother with shoes. I did not bother with a coat. I just ran for the front door, my heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. I burst outside into the cool night air and immediately swept my flashlight beam across the front yard. There, at the end of my driveway, was a figure. Small, hunched, dressed in black. The figure froze when my light hit them, and for one eternal second we just stared at each other across the distance. I could not see their face. They were wearing a hoodie pulled low, the kind that cast deep shadows even in direct light. But I could see their body language, the sudden tension, the coiled readiness to flee. And then they ran. I chased them. I do not know what I was planning to do if I caught them. I was not armed. I was not particularly athletic. I was a 43-year-old software engineer in my pajamas, sprinting barefoot down the sidewalk in the middle of the night. But something had taken over, some primal need to see this through, to finally unmask the person who had been terrorizing our neighborhood. The figure was fast, faster than I expected, but I was fueled by weeks of frustration and anger. I closed the distance between us as we rounded the corner onto Maple Street, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I ran. I was close enough now to see details. The pajama pants dragging slightly on the pavement, the gloves on the hands, the slight limp on the left side. That limp. I knew that limp. And then I was yelling without even meaning to. Karen, stop, Karen. The figure stumbled at the sound of their name, hesitated for just a fraction of a second, and that hesitation cost them. They tripped on a raised section of sidewalk and went down hard, catching themselves with their hands but losing momentum completely. I was almost on them when they scrambled back to their feet and bolted again, disappearing around another corner into the darkness between streetlights. By the time I got to that corner, they were gone. Just gone, vanished into the maze of backyards and shadows that made up our neighborhood at night. I stood there gasping for breath, hands on my knees, feeling like my lungs were about to explode. I had been so close, so incredibly close. And then I looked down at the ground, where the figure had fallen. There was something glinting in my flashlight beam, something small and silver, lying right where the vandal had hit the pavement. I picked it up and held it close to my face, already knowing what I would see, but needing to confirm it anyway. It was a charm bracelet with a clasp engraved KW. I had her. That night, I did not sleep at all. I went back to my house and immediately pulled up the footage from my hidden camera, the one in the birdhouse that had been running all night on its closed circuit system. And there it was. Crystal clear video of the hooded figure approaching my mailbox at 3:04 a.m. They had brought a crowbar with them, holding it loosely at their side as they walked up my driveway. They were clearly planning to add me to their list of victims. The figure paused at my mailbox and looked around carefully, checking for witnesses. And then, right before they could raise the crowbar, my front door flew open and I came charging out with my flashlight. The video caught everything after that. The figure freezing, the figure running, the figure rounding the corner of my property with me in pursuit. And most importantly, the moment when the figure's hood slipped back just slightly as they turned to look over their shoulder. It was only visible for maybe 2 seconds. A flash of blonde hair. The lower half of a face caught in the edge of my flashlight beam. A jawline that was instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever sat through one of Karen Whitfield's endless HOA meetings. It was her. It was absolutely, undeniably her. I showed Sarah the footage at 6 in the morning over cups of coffee that neither of us really wanted. She watched it 3 times in silence, her face going through a journey from disbelief to anger to a grim kind of satisfaction. When she finally spoke, she said just one word. Why? That was the question, was it not? Why would Karen Whitfield, president of the Homeowners Association, a woman who claimed to care more about this neighborhood than anyone else, spend weeks destroying property and then fining the victims for the damage? It made no sense, unless you understood what Karen really cared about. Power. She did not care about the neighborhood. She cared about controlling the neighborhood. She cared about watching her neighbors jump when she said jump, about seeing fear in their eyes when she approached with her clipboard, about knowing that everyone was constantly looking over their shoulder, wondering if they were going to be her next target. The fines were not just about money. They were about dominance. They were about proving that she could victimize people and then punish them for being victimized, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. The mailbox vandalism was the ultimate expression of her twisted need for control. She was creating the chaos herself, then swooping in as the authority figure to document it and profit from it. Every violation she issued was a reminder of her power. Every fine collected was tribute to her reign. She was a queen presiding over a kingdom of fear, and the mailboxes were just the latest weapon in her arsenal. But now I had evidence, real evidence, video footage and a silver bracelet with her initials on it. The question was what to do with it. I could have gone straight to the police. Part of me wanted to, but I also knew that Karen was clever, that she had probably anticipated this possibility and prepared some kind of defense. The hoodie had covered her face in most of the footage. She could claim the bracelet was lost or stolen. She could point to her reputation in the community and suggest that someone was trying to frame her. Without more proof, it might come down to my word against hers. So I decided to confront her first, to see what she would do when she realized the game was up. I walked over to her house at exactly 7:30 that morning, right when I knew she would be finishing her breakfast before starting her daily inspection rounds. My heart was pounding as I walked up her perfectly manicured driveway, past her pretentious mailbox, up to her front door with its seasonal wreath and polished brass knocker. I knocked 3 times and waited. The door opened, and there was Karen, dressed in her standard uniform of pressed khakis and pastel cardigan, her makeup already perfect, her hair already sprayed into immobility. She looked surprised to see me, but only for a moment. Then that familiar tight-lipped smile appeared. "Eli," she said, "what an unexpected pleasure. Is there something I can help you with?" I held up the bracelet. She saw it, and I watched the color drain from her face. "You dropped this last night," I said, "when I was chasing you down Maple Street." She did not say anything for a long moment. Her eyes went from the bracelet to my face and back again, calculating, processing, trying to figure out how much I knew and what she could do about it. "I have no idea what you are talking about," she said finally. "That is not my bracelet." "Really?" I said, "because it has your initials on it. KW, and it matches the one you always wear to HOA meetings. The one you got from your late husband, the one you never take off." She glanced down at her right wrist, and I saw her realize that the bracelet was not there. Her bare wrist told the whole story. She had not even noticed she lost it. "That does not prove anything," she said, but her voice was different now. Tighter, more defensive. Someone could have stolen it. "I have video footage," I said, "from a camera you did not know about. It shows someone with blonde hair approaching my mailbox with a crowbar last night. Someone who walks with a limp on their left side. Someone whose hood slipped at just the right moment." Karen's composure finally cracked. Her face twisted into something ugly, something that had probably always been lurking beneath the surface, but that she had learned to hide under layers of false politeness and manufactured concern. "You cannot prove anything," she hissed. "A hooded figure could be anyone. Half the women in this neighborhood have blonde hair." "Maybe," I said, "but I bet if the police search your garage, they will find a crowbar and a signal jammer and probably paint chips from all those mailboxes you destroyed. I bet you did not think you needed to hide the evidence, did you, Karen? You thought you were untouchable." She stared at me with such hatred that I actually took a step backward. This was not the Karen everyone saw at meetings. This was the real Karen, the one who had been hiding behind the clipboard and the pearls and the fake concern for the community. And then she said something that confirmed everything. If people kept their homes up to standard, she snarled, I would not have to fix anything. There it was, her confession. Not quite an admission that she had destroyed the mailboxes, but close enough. She thought she was fixing things. She thought she was justified. In her twisted mind, terrorizing her neighbors and punishing them for crimes she committed was somehow serving the greater good of the community. I am going to the police, I said, and I am calling an emergency HOA meeting. Everyone is going to know what you did. You cannot do that, she said, but there was desperation in her voice now. Fear, you have no authority. I am the president. I control the meetings. Not for long. I turned and walked away from her house, feeling her eyes burning into my back with every step. I half expected her to chase after me, to try to stop me somehow, but she just stood in her doorway, watching me go, probably trying to figure out how to spin this in her favor. She never got the chance. Within 2 hours, I had shared the video footage with every household on Pinewood Lane. Mr. Patel took one look at it and immediately started making calls. Mrs. Okonkwo went door to door gathering signatures for a petition to remove Karen from office. The Garcias volunteered their backyard for an emergency neighborhood meeting that afternoon. By noon, the entire street knew what Karen had done. The police arrived at Karen's house around 3 in the afternoon. I watched from my front porch as 2 officers walked up her perfect driveway and knocked on her perfect door. She answered in her pearls and cardigan, trying to maintain her composure, but I could see her hands shaking from 50 feet away. They were inside for about 45 minutes. When they came back out, they were carrying evidence bags. One bag contained something long and dark, a crowbar. Another bag contained a small electronic device, the signal jammer. A third bag contained what looked like metal fragments and paint chips. Karen was not arrested that day, but she was placed under investigation for vandalism, property damage, and fraud. The fraud charges came from the fines he had collected from victims of crimes she herself had committed. Apparently that is a big deal when you are supposed to be a fiduciary acting in the best interest of your community. The emergency HOA meeting happened that evening. It was the largest turnout for any meeting in the history of Pinewood Lane. People were angry, and rightfully so. They demanded answers. They demanded accountability. And most of all, they demanded that Karen Whitfield be removed from office immediately. Karen did not show up to defend herself. She was too busy consulting with a lawyer, according to the gossip that was already spreading through the neighborhood. But the board, which consisted of 2 elderly neighbors who had always rubber-stamped everything Karen wanted, surprised everyone by voting unanimously to remove her from the presidency. It turned out that those 2 elderly neighbors had been just as afraid of Karen as everyone else. They had been going along with her schemes because they did not think anyone would ever stand up to her. Once they saw that the tide had turned, they were more than happy to abandon ship. The investigation lasted about 3 weeks. In Karen's garage, police found everything I had predicted and more. The crowbar with fresh dents that matched the damage patterns on multiple mailboxes. The signal jammer, which turned out to be a surprisingly sophisticated device that she had ordered online from an electronics supplier. Paint chips and metal fragments from at least 4 different mailboxes. Photographs she had taken of the mailboxes before they were vandalized, apparently for planning purposes, and detailed notes about which houses she planned to target next, including mine. It was that last piece of evidence that really sealed her fate. Her own handwritten notes proved premeditation. She had planned every attack in advance, chosen victims based on some criteria that only made sense in her twisted mind, and kept meticulous records of her activities. The woman who had tormented everyone else with her paperwork and her bylaws had ultimately been brought down by her own obsessive documentation. The criminal charges were significant: vandalism across multiple properties, criminal mischief, fraud, harassment, conspiracy. Karen was facing potential jail time, though her lawyer managed to negotiate a plea deal that kept her out of prison in exchange for full restitution to all victims and a permanent restraining order keeping her away from Pinewood Lane. The restitution came to almost $15,000 when you added up all the destroyed mailboxes, all the fines that had to be refunded, and the damages awarded to people for emotional distress. Karen had to sell her car to cover the payments. I heard later that she took out a second mortgage on her house. But the money was not the most important thing. The most important thing was watching her pack her boxes a month later, loading them into a moving truck under the watchful eyes of neighbors who had once been afraid to even look at her. She kept her head down the whole time, not making eye contact with anyone, not saying a word. The pearls were gone. The carefully styled hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a balloon that had finally run out of air. As the moving truck pulled away, someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then the whole street was applauding, not in celebration of someone's misfortune, but in relief. Relief that the nightmare was finally over. Relief that our neighborhood was ours again. In the weeks that followed, Pinewood Lane started to heal. The first thing we did was replace all the mailboxes together as a community project. We spent a Saturday afternoon digging new holes, setting new posts, and installing mailboxes that were stronger and better than the ones Karen had destroyed. We used steel bases this time, anchored deep in concrete, with locking mechanisms to protect our mail. But more than that, we worked together. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other for years found themselves sharing tools, sharing stories, sharing laughter. The second thing we did was rewrite the HOA bylaws. The new rules were fair, reasonable, and focused on actual issues that affected the quality of life in the neighborhood rather than arbitrary aesthetic standards designed to give someone an excuse to exercise power. We eliminated the ridiculous fines for minor infractions. We created a grievance process that actually protected residents instead of empowering bullies. And we instituted term limits so that no one person could ever accumulate the kind of authority that Karen had wielded. Mr. Patel was elected as the new HOA president, partly because of his role in helping expose Karen, but mostly because everyone knew he was a genuinely good person who would never abuse the position. His first official act was to hang a new sign at the entrance to the neighborhood that read "Welcome to Pinewood Lane," where neighbors look out for each other. The third thing we did was start actually talking to each other again. We organized block parties in the summer. We set up a neighborhood watch program that was based on cooperation rather than surveillance. We created a group chat where people could share concerns, ask for help, or just check in on each other. The fear that had defined our community for 3 years evaporated like morning fog in the sunshine. As for me, I became something of a local hero, which was strange and uncomfortable, but also kind of wonderful. People would stop me on the street to thank me for what I had done. Kids would point at my house and tell their friends that was where the guy lived who caught the mailbox wrecker. I even got interviewed by the local newspaper, though I made sure to emphasize that it was a community effort that brought Karen down, not just my hidden camera. Sarah and I talked about moving at one point, finding somewhere new where we did not have all this history. But in the end, we decided to stay. This was our home. These were our neighbors. And after everything we had been through together, Pinewood Lane was stronger than it had ever been. The story of Karen Whitfield became a legend in our neighborhood, told and retold at barbecues and holiday parties and casual conversations over fences. New families who moved in would eventually hear the tale, always slightly different depending on who was telling it, but always with the same core message. This is a neighborhood that looks out for its own. We do not tolerate bullies here, and if you ever try to terrorize us, we will stand together and take you down. Sometimes, late at night, I still find myself looking out the window toward the street, checking on our mailbox. It is a reflex I cannot quite shake, a reminder of those weeks when we all lived in fear of what morning would bring. But the mailbox is always there, standing tall and sturdy in the glow of the streetlight, a symbol of what we built together after the storm. Karen never came back to Pinewood Lane. The restraining order saw to that, but honestly, I think she would have stayed away even without it. There was nothing left for her here. The power she had craved was gone. The fear she had cultivated had been replaced by contempt. She was just another cautionary tale now, a reminder of what happens when small people get access to small amounts of power and let it corrupt them completely. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to a different state and joined a new homeowners association there. I hope she learned her lesson. I hope she is content to just be a regular neighbor now, following rules instead of weaponizing them. But honestly, part of me doubts it. People like Karen do not change easily. The hunger for control is too deeply embedded in who they are. But that is not my problem anymore. My problem is making sure my lawn looks nice for the neighborhood barbecue next weekend, and helping Mrs. Okonkwo fix her fence, and keeping an eye out for the elderly couple on the corner who sometimes need help bringing in their groceries. My problem is being a good neighbor in a community of good neighbors, looking out for each other the way we always should have been. And if another Karen ever shows up, trying to turn our home into her personal kingdom, we will be ready. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA president from hell? Someone who abused their power and made life miserable for everyone around them? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and sometimes the best stories end up becoming videos themselves. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. We post new HOA horror stories every single week, and trust me, there are plenty more Karens out there waiting to be exposed. And if you or someone you know is dealing with an HOA bully right now, share this video with them. Sometimes just knowing that other people have been through the same thing and come out the other side is enough to give someone the courage to stand up for themselves. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, your neighborhood belongs to the people who live in it, not to the tyrants who try to control it. Stay strong, look out for each other, and never be afraid to fight back. I will see you in the next video.